Turn with me to Matthew chapter 12. We are finishing up our series on this chapter of Scripture. We've gone all the way through, well, I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but we've been working our way through the book of Matthew now for a couple of years. And so we started at the beginning, and now we're halfway through. And it's been such an important series for me. I've been really enjoying just following Jesus' earthly ministry. And here in chapter 12, Jesus takes time to really drive home the correlation between our faith and what we believe and how that affects our lives. And he's doing that through challenging the Pharisees. So throughout chapter 12, he has run-in after run-in with the Pharisees, challenging them in what they perceive, what they understand, challenging them in their faith. And so interaction after interaction, Jesus is challenging the Pharisees and the people around him and his disciples. And he's driving it really to one central issue, to one central point, and that he gets to that here today. The central issue is the issue of the heart. You see, all of this, everything that the Pharisees believe, everything that they're experiencing in their lives, it all comes back to their heart. And the same is true for you and for me. It comes back to our hearts. Where is our heart? What's in our heart? And Jesus has addressed this time after time, and he drives it home today in the passage we have. See, the point that Jesus is making here is that your heart will guide the rest of your life. I was listening to an interview over this past week. This journalist was interviewing this guy named Mr. Beast. Anybody know who Mr. Beast is? Anybody? Okay, like all the kids know. A few of you trendy adults may know. So if you don't know who Mr. Beast is, he's the most subscribed to YouTuber in all of America. So he's got 332 million subscribers. Now, I'm not telling you to go subscribe. He's not a Christian, and he's kind of, I'm not saying you need to go watch his stuff. But he is the most subscribed person in all of America on YouTube. His videos, just so you kind of understand how popular this guy is, his videos have been viewed more than 64 billion times on YouTube. So all of his videos combined, more than 64 billion views. He spends upwards of $4 million a video right now. He was talking about that in his interview. And he's 25 years old. He's been doing this since he was 11. So he's been almost full-time, like rocking and rolling for over 10 years, since he was a teenager. He's been doing this. And the interview was fascinating, but in the interview, as I was listening, something caught my attention. He's talking about what has driven him to this point in his YouTube career. How has he gotten to where he is by 25 years old? And as the interviewer was asking him this question, he immediately chimed in. He's like, you guys got to understand, this is all I do. So every single day, I wake up, I work out, I make content, and I go to sleep. Every single day for 14 years, I wake up, I work out, I make content, and I go to sleep. It's all I care about. It's all I talk about. It's all I'm focused on. Now, I'm paraphrasing just a little bit. But as he was talking to them about his daily routine and all that he does, they asked him a couple other questions, and he interjected again. He's like, guys, listen, you don't understand. Like, this is not for anyone else to do. I would not recommend anyone else to do this, he told them, because he's like, I'm miserable. This is my entire life, and I'm miserable. I have no life. It consumes every aspect of my time. This is not for anyone else. This is all I have. And as I heard him tell them how miserable his life makes him, my heart broke for him. And I'm listening to him, this wildly successful young man, this world-famous person, is talking about how his life really is not one that anybody else would want to live. Now, how has he gotten to that place? Why has he allowed himself to get there? It's because his heart is full of a need to be number one. What's getting him to where he is? He's driven by this insatiable desire. I would say it's probably pride, but this insatiable desire to be the absolute best no matter what it takes. And he doesn't care about anything else but producing content. My friends, as I listened to him describe his life, I thought about what Jesus was saying in this passage, that it's your heart that drives you. And what consumes your heart, what fills your heart, will dictate the direction of your life. Now, for Mr. Beast, according to his own words, his heart is full of a drive to be number one, and his entire life revolves around that one central thing. And my question for all of us this morning is, what has your heart? Who has your heart? Where is your heart? Because whatever has your heart has your life, has all of you. Look at what Jesus says here. We're in Matthew chapter 12. We're going to be in verses 43 through 50. So we're going to finish out chapter 12 today. And look at what Jesus says here. He's in the middle of this discussion with the Pharisees. And Pastor Darrell did a great job last week talking about the first part of this conversation that Jesus is having with the Pharisees. We're going to finish the conversation today. So here he is starting in verse 43. It says, when the unclean spirit has gone out of a person, it passes through waterless places seeking rest, but finds nothing. Then it says, I will return to my house from which I came, and when it comes, then it says, I will return to my house from which I came, and when it comes, it finds the house empty, swept, and put in order. Then it goes and brings with it 7 other spirits, more evil than itself, and they enter and dwell there. And the last state of that person is worse than the first. So also will it be with this evil generation. Now stop there for a second. Jesus is talking about the heart of man, and he's specifically talking about here when an evil spirit is cast out of the heart of a person, that they could go through all this work to clean up their lives, to make themselves look good, and to put things in order. But if they don't fill their heart with something else, that evil spirit can come back and say, hey, thanks for cleaning up my house for me. And bring with it 7 more spirits that are even more evil than it. And so Jesus is here. He is talking about demonic possession and just oppression and these influences in our lives that can come in. But he continues on, and this is connected. What happens next is connected to what Jesus is talking about here in regard to our heart. Look at verse 46. It says, while he was still speaking to the people, behold, his mother and brothers stood outside, asking to speak to him. So Mary comes with her other sons looking for Jesus. I imagine they're probably worried about him. Verse 48 says, but he replied to the man who told him, he said, who is my mother and who are my brothers? Stretching out his hand toward the disciples, he said, here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother. Jesus, throughout this final part of Matthew 12, is talking about the heart. And the first thing that ought to grab our attention, the first thing that Jesus is driving home for us here as we look at that first paragraph, that I want to reiterate to you all this morning, is if your heart is empty, something will fill it. If your heart is empty, something will fill it. He's talking to the Pharisees here, using this example of casting out a demonic spirit out of a person, casting out this demon. He's like, you can cast a spirit out of a person, you can remove them from sin, you can remove them from evil, and they can make their lives look really great. They can clean it all up, they can set everything in order, but if they don't then take the next step of filling their heart, filling their lives with something else, guess what happens? Those influences are allowed to come right back in. I think the key word here in that whole paragraph is empty. And you see it here as the spirit goes out. I'm looking for exactly what verse it was. I left it out. In verse 44, it says that when he comes and he finds the house empty, swept, and put in order, he's actually happy. The spirit is. The evil influences. And my friends, we can go through all the work. We can jump through all the hoops of making our lives look really neat, very orderly. And why was Jesus saying this to the Pharisees? Because that's exactly what the Pharisees did. That is their exact approach to religion and to their relationship with God. It was all through performance. It was all through controlling their actions. We talked before about how you have to change a fruit by changing the tree, right? You change the tree to change the fruit. You don't change the tree through the fruit. The Pharisees had everything backward. They're trying to change their heart by changing their actions, but the truth is you change your actions by changing your heart. And so Jesus is getting right to this heart issue, driving it home. He's saying you've worked really hard to set your life in order, to make yourself look good. You've worked really hard to clean things up, but your heart is empty. It's hollow. And if you leave your heart empty, guess what will happen? All of the oppression from your past life, all of the influences from your past life, all of those things will come right back into your heart because it's empty. And the issue for the Pharisees isn't that their lives didn't look good, isn't that they were doing all these terrible things. It was that their hearts were hollow. They had no genuine relationship with God. And as a result, their hearts were empty. And they're leaving themselves open to all of the influences around them. And my friends, what I want to ask you today is your heart empty? Are you focusing on the wrong thing? Because the truth is, your heart pulls in whatever you surround yourself with. Whatever influences you put yourselves around every single day, whatever your situation you're constantly putting yourself in, your friend group, the places you go, the TV you watch, the people you listen to, whatever you're surrounding yourself with, your heart will begin to pull in. It will begin to stash deep down. We talked before several weeks ago about our heart treasures things. And what you continually surround yourself with, your heart will continually pull in deep within itself and treasure. So are you surrounding yourself with evil, or are you surrounding yourself with righteousness? Are you surrounding yourself with good influences, great friends, people that challenge you in your faith? Or are you surrounding yourself with terrible influences, people who are dragging you down with them into evil and sin and debauchery? Are you surrounding yourself with people who love God, or are you surrounding yourself with people who despise God, who don't know God? And whatever we continually surround ourselves with will begin to lead our lives that direction because our heart is pulling it in. Now, I will preface all this by saying that doesn't mean we don't make friends with sinful people. Obviously, we make friends with people who don't know the Lord, but we have to surround ourselves with people and put ourselves in positions to absorb righteousness on a continual basis so we can go and be a light into somebody else's life. I see all the time men and women getting themselves into relationships that are totally sinful, where one is so far away from the Lord, and the one who is trying to have a relationship with the Lord always enters into it saying, well, I have to be a witness to him. I have to tell her about the Lord, and what better way than to be in a relationship? No, that's the worst possible thing you could ever do. It's the worst because they'll always lead you further away from the Lord. Always. Who we surround ourselves with, the influences we surround ourselves with, our hearts begin to pull in. Similarly, what you consume, your heart holds on to whatever you consume. So it begins to pull in what you surround yourself with, and then what you are putting into your life purposefully, your heart holds on to it, like stores up these things, it treasures them. Jesus talked about that before. And so if you're consuming all this bad media, you're consuming all this pornography, you're consuming all these podcasters that are, talking about terrible things with terrible language, if you're consuming all of this, whatever you want to think of, whether it be media, whether it be, just consuming whatever it is you're addicted to, the drugs or the alcohol or whatever it might be, you're filling your life, you're consuming these things, it begins to change your heart because your heart begins to treasure up those things. I don't know if you guys know this or not, but I think about this sometimes in regard to this. But did you know flamingos are born white? Like flamingos' feathers are actually white. Did you know that? And when they grow in their feathers the first time, that they're all white, but then they start turning pink because of the food they eat. So the little crustaceans and the algae, they're all red. And so as flamingos are eating all this stuff that's all red, their feathers slowly start turning pink. And the longer they live and the more they eat, the more pink they become because of what they're consuming. It sticks with them. It changes them. You can literally look at a flamingo and know what it's eating. Did you know that? Did you know you could look at a person, be around a person, and after you're around them a short period of time, you can start to understand what they're consuming? You can tell by the way they talk. You can tell by the way they act. You can tell by the things that they're doing. You can tell by the fruit that's grown on the tree. Why? Because we hold on to what we consume. And I wish young people would think about this more. Because sometimes we get ourselves into really difficult positions early in life that set us up for tragedy later on because we're surrounding ourselves with influences and consuming things, music and media and things that have no place in the life of a believer, in the mind of a believer, in the heart of a believer. And your heart's holding on to those things. I remember as a teenager, I started listening to music. I'm going to tattle on myself here. Listening to music that, tons of curse words and just not, it obviously wasn't Christian. And I remember one time my dad heard one of the songs that was playing in my room, and he swung that door open. He was so mad. "What is this?" And he's yelling at me. And I was defending it. "I can listen to whatever music I want, Now I have teenagers, and I know that I'm going to have these probably same arguments. I'm not excited about it. I'm remembering those years. I was real defiant. I was like, I can listen to whatever. You know what happened? I started cursing. Never had before. It was never a problem for me before. Why was that? Because it was storing up in my heart. And I was putting it into my brain. And you might say, well, I just like the beat. That was what me and my friends thought. I just like the beat. I'm not listening to the words. Your heart's listening to the words. Your heart's pulling in what's around you. And it may seem silly, but my friends, do you want to be holding on to things that are evil, that are bad influences, or do you want to hold on to things that are good and righteous and pleasing to God? That's what you ought to fill your life with. And all of us stumble in this. There's things in all of our lives. My life right now, there's things that I'm sure the Lord will reveal to me that are like, hey, it's time to pull this out of your life. You don't need this. All of us, no matter how old we become, put yourself in a position to win, to draw closer to God, not in a position to move further away from Him. That's what it's all about. If your heart is empty, something's going to fill it. So what are you filling your heart with? I don't want to leave myself open into a position where any old thing can just come into my heart. I want my heart to be so full of Jesus that there's no room for anything else. That's the goal. Amen? So Jesus is talking about this issue with this unclean spirit that's being cast out. It's a little supernatural, and for some people it might be like, well, that's a really spooky thing to say. Why is Jesus talking about evil spirits? I'm just going to be frank with you guys. Demonic possession is real, and there is spiritual warfare and demonic oppression and the enemy coming after, like that's real, and so we do need to be aware of that. I don't want to shy away from that. This passage has far broader consequences and implications than just demonic possession, because as I just said, if your heart is open, anything can come in. Any influences. And so I'm not saying that if you listen to bad music, you're going to be demon possessed. I'm not saying that. But I am saying that your heart's going to be full of something. And that's what Jesus is saying here. And he's using an illustration that the Pharisees would quickly understand. And as he's talking to the Pharisees, his mom and his brothers come to get him. Now I imagine that, they've known Jesus their whole life, his whole life. His brothers have known him their whole lives. And I imagine they're really concerned about him. I'm just guessing. But if your older brother was proclaiming to be God and talking about all this stuff and had this huge following, you'd probably be a little concerned, wouldn't you? And the scripture talks about how his brothers did not believe he was the Messiah or that he was God until after his death and resurrection. But then after that, his brothers came to know him who he truly was, he revealed himself to his brothers. And in fact, James, one of his brothers, became one of the greatest leaders of the early church, one of the greatest apostles, wrote the book of James. And so they came to understand who Jesus was as the Messiah. But here they didn't know. They didn't believe. It was just their older brother. And so they're coming to him. They're concerned about him. They want to pull him out of wherever he is, his house, his place. They want to pull him out of this situation. Like, just come home and eat dinner with us, right? And the guy who comes to tell him, hey, your mom and your brothers are here, he's like, who are my mom and my brothers? Who are they? And what Jesus is doing here is he's leveraging the situation, as he always does, to further his point. So he's talking about the issues of the heart. He's talking about what has your heart. And here he's firmly asserting the fact that his heart is not, he has not pledged allegiance in his heart to his mom and his brothers. Now, this is a difficult pill to swallow for us human people because we love our parents and we love our children so very much. But here Jesus makes a really important point. It's like, my mom and my brothers don't own my heart. Who owns my heart? The Father who's in heaven. Who are my mom and my brothers? Those who are with me and following my Father who is in heaven. And what Jesus is really pushing forward here is that if your heart is possessed, no one else can take it. And when I say possessed here, I don't mean demon possessed. I mean owned. If your heart is possessed, if your heart is owned, then no one else can take it. And Jesus is saying, my heart is owned. It's possessed by someone. It is owned by the Father who is in heaven. And I imagine Jesus loved his mother and his brothers just every bit as much as you and I love our mom and our siblings. But Jesus is saying, my heart's not with them. My heart is with my Father in heaven. And he furthers his point here in a minute, but I want to focus in on verses 46 and 49. This is hard for us. I think this is a difficult pill to swallow. But my friends, whoever occupies your heart owns your life. Whoever occupies your heart owns your life. And we fall victim to this. Even in the church, we fall victim into bringing people into our hearts at such a deep level that they begin to rule and reign in our lives rather than Jesus, rather than he who is in heaven. And we can become so consumed with our significant other, with our boyfriend, with our girlfriend. We can become so consumed, so infatuated with other people that they literally take possession of our hearts. And I'm telling you that if they have possession of your heart, then you've pushed out Jesus. Whoever possesses your heart, they own your life. And I've seen so many super unhealthy relationships because one person is just completely consumed with the other individual. And it's super unhealthy. It takes over their relationship with Jesus. It takes precedence over everything else. And my friends, there is an order. There's a priority to things in life. It is your relationship with God. If you're married, then it's your relationship with your spouse right after that. If you have kids, then it's your relationship with your kids. Can I just say, your kids in the priority list come after your spouse. They do. And then it's your work, then it's all those other things, they come after that. But number one is your relationship with Jesus Christ. He must possess your heart. Own your heart. Take full dominance, allegiance of your heart. And I know that can be difficult. You know what's really difficult for us, I believe, in this day and age, even more so than your spouse or your significant other, is your kids. And I far too often encounter people who I believe have their kids in this unhealthy position in their heart where they're idolizing their children, almost in a way worshiping their kids by revolving their entire lives around their children. And then when their kids grow up and move out of their house, they are empty. That's not healthy. Yes, love your children. Absolutely. I just want to be really clear. We love our kids. We are great parents. But Jesus owns my heart. Jesus does. Because whoever owns your heart, whoever occupies your heart, owns your life. Similarly, whatever preoccupies your attention plots your future. So whatever you're focused on, whatever dominates your attention, that plots your future. It plots the direction of your life. So where your gaze is, that's the direction your life will go, where you're focusing your attention. It's plotting your future. If you focus in on negativity, you focus in on hurt, you focus in on this or that, guess what? That's going to guide your life into negativity and hurt the rest of your life. If that's your focus, that's where you're going to end up. If your focus is on righteousness, is on spiritual maturity, if that's your sole focus, and guess what? That's the direction your life is going to go. You have to set your sights on something. And if you don't do it on purpose, then something is going to distract you and take your attention, and that's where your life is going to go. It's whatever's preoccupying your attention. I know this because I've seen it play out in my life in so many different ways. When I was on active duty in El Paso, I was at Fort Bliss, stationed there for a year. When I was in the Army, I didn't get to go with my family, so I was there all by myself. So I had loads of spare time on my hands. And I decided, for the first time in my life, I'm going to work out and I'm going to get fit. And I was going to the gym every day after work. I was running a 5K every day. We had a 5K track right by my barracks. So I'd go run a 5K every day. Then I'd go work out. And I was doing this whole bit. And I did it for months. And every day at the gym, I'd get to the gym. I'd start working out. And I'd be like, man, I hate this. Man, I hate this. This is so dumb. I'd be running my 5K like, I hate that. Why? I hate this. Why am I doing this? Like, I could be watching Netflix. There's, I hear about this Mr. Beast guy. I'm just kidding. I didn't watch him. But I've got all this other stuff that I could be doing. And every time when I'm running and working out, my whole attention is about how much I hate it, how terrible it is, and how much I'd rather do anything else but what I'm doing right then. And you know what? I only lasted a couple months. Why? Because my attention was everywhere else. I hated it. I didn't want to do that. You might not be able to tell by looking at me, but I don't work out a whole lot. It's not a thing that I've kept in my life. It's awful. I don't understand you people that work out all the time. It's the worst. I like eating deer jerky, and I like watching, I'm just kidding. I won't go there. But my attention was on how awful it was, and so I couldn't last. If I could have put my attention, that's a failure of mine. I was starting to get in good shape. I could run really far. If I would have been focusing on what I was accomplishing and what I was seeing, the results I was seeing, I would have been awesome. I would have kept going. But now I've been rebelling against that for 15 years, and, I don't think I'll ever go back. What has your attention? Where's your life going? What are you focusing on? What's swirling around in your heart right now? What's consuming your thoughts day in and day out? Whatever that is, that's the direction your life is going to go, whether you like it or not. Turn your attention to Him. He's calling for your attention. Mary, the brothers, they went to get Jesus. They were literally trying to get His attention. He's like, no, I'm focused on something. It's the will of my Father. And I will carry out the mission that my Father has for me, no matter who asks. And Jesus made very clear that his relationship with God the Father took precedence over his relationship with his mother and his brothers. And I believe that the challenge for you and I is the exact same. Our relationship with the Father trumps everything else. Because whoever owns your heart owns your life. My friends, last thing here in verse 50, as we come to a close, look what he says. He says, whoever does the will of my Father in heaven, he is my brother, my sister, and my mother. And again, Jesus is just driving this home, talking about who he considers to be with him in family. It's not his physical family. It's his spiritual family. Those who are with him doing what? Doing the will of the Father. And I believe that here Jesus is asserting the need to have a committed heart, a heart that is fully committed to the Lord, no matter the cost, no matter what may come, a heart that is fully and entirely committed to the will of the Father. And my friends, I want to talk to you for just a minute about what a committed heart is. If you're taking notes, there's 3 things that I would tell you it makes up a committed heart. Number 1 is a committed heart is faithful. A committed heart is faithful. Jesus says, who's my family? It's those who do the will of my Father. And I would say he's talking about whether circumstances are great or circumstances are trying, whether things are awesome or whether you hate them, right? Whatever it may be, He's saying those who are committed to me will do the will of my Father no matter what it costs. They stick with it. That is a faithful and committed heart. Faithful. I'll tell you also that a committed heart is full. Remember, this all comes back to an empty heart. That if your heart is empty, something will fill it. And I'm telling you right now that if your heart is committed, it is full. It's full of the Holy Spirit. It's full of a love for the Lord. It's full of a drive to accomplish his mission in this world, his mission for the church, his mission for your life. It is full of a desire to know him and want to be with him more. A committed heart is a full heart. So full that nothing is going to come in and take ownership. Why? Because Jesus is there. That's a committed heart. Finally, I would tell you that a committed heart is focused. Committed heart is focused on the task at hand. Again, what does Jesus say? Who's my family? Those who do the will of my Father who is in heaven. And I believe that has to be our focus. We have to focus in on what Jesus is working to accomplish in this world and how we can be an active participant in that, how we can draw ourselves closer to him. It is focused. A committed heart is focused on what Jesus has in mind, not on what you have in mind. Sometimes we don't like what Jesus calls us to do, right? I didn't like working out, but it would have been really good for me. Sometimes I don't like what Jesus has for me to do, but I know that it's really good for me. And we have to focus in on what Jesus is calling and leading us to do. And we have to give it our all. I think of this oftentimes, if the worship team wants to come up and help me close this thing out. I think of this oftentimes in relation to marriage. Specifically for me, my marriage to Sarah. She's my wife, 15 years. And I think about how before I was married, it was hard sometimes to keep my focus where it needed to be. It was sometimes difficult to keep my attention from straying before I was married. But the thing about marriage is that I'm committed. And when I said I do, and when my wife and I, we actually stood right here, when we stood on this stage and we said I do to one another, that commitment took precedence over everything else. And my heart was so full of love for my wife. She's a wonderful wife, and she's earned it. But my heart is so full of love for my wife that there's no room for love for another woman. There's no room for my attention to be grabbed by somebody else. Because of my marriage, because of my commitment, I have blinders on, and there's just one woman in my life, and that will always be the case. My heart is full. There's no room for anyone else, and there's no one else that's going to distract me from what I'm focused on building with Sarah and my family in that regard. I think about that in our relationship to Jesus. Jesus uses marriage oftentimes to talk about the church's relationship with him. Now, when we commit ourselves to Christ, we are all in. Here it is, Jesus. Here's my heart. Here's my life. Here's my expectations. Here's everything I have. I'm yours. And there's no room for my attention to go here or there or anywhere else. I'm going to put blinders on, and Jesus, I'm going to look at you. I'm going to look at the cross. I'm going to keep plowing my way forward, following after you, no matter what is happening over here. Jesus, I want you and your will for my life. I think that's what Jesus is driving home here. That if you have a committed heart to him, it's going to be faithful to him. It's going to be full of love for him. It's going to be focused on what he has for you. I think that's what we're called to do as believers. So maybe this morning you find yourself a little distracted. Maybe you have found yourself straying a little bit in your life, and you may say to yourself, my spiritual walk, my relationship with Jesus, it's not what it was 10 years ago. As I look at my life right now, my spiritual life, my relationship with him, it's waned. I'm not feeling it. I haven't been going to church until here lately, or, this is my first week back in years, whatever it might be. And you say, you know what? I really feel like I've been distracted. I veered off the path a little bit. Today, though, I realize I want to refocus my energy on him. I want to focus every bit of my attention, all of my energy on what he has for me. And I realize that today the Lord's getting my attention, and he's calling me to follow him, whatever the cost. Maybe that's you. You see, it's just gone a different direction than you thought it would, and today's the day to just come back on that path. Maybe you're a little bit different. Maybe today you find yourself in a position where you realize you've never followed the Lord, that you actually don't even really know him, but you want to. Maybe your heart's been empty. Maybe it's been getting filled up with bad influences, with evil influences, with the content you're storing away in it. And today you say, I don't want any of that stuff. I want to clear that all away. I want to leave it at these altars, and I want to walk away full, but full of Jesus, full of his love. And I want to commit myself for the first time to follow Jesus. I want to leave all this other stuff down. I want to follow him. So maybe you need to do that for the first time. Whatever your situation, the worship team's going to lead us through song. As they lead, no matter which camp you find yourself in, my challenge to you this morning is don't stay in your seat. If you identify with either one of those situations, either the Lord's calling you to recommit, it's time to get out of your seat, it's time to get alone with him, and it's time for you to, between you and him, to say, Lord, I'm yours. Or maybe today's the day for you to, for the first time, commit yourself to Jesus, to become a disciple, and to get off the road that you're on, and you need to go down the straight and narrow path that leads to him, that leads to life. Whatever your situation may be, I want to challenge you. Come find a place up here as the worship team leads us. Get alone with him. Seek Jesus. Leave this stuff at the altar and walk back with a heart that is full and pure and enriched with the love of Jesus Christ. Would you stand with me today?